Video isn't always the answer. You have to get the book. You can't reference a video very easily.
We do make it on.
If you want the end of chapter 5 in Walden, then get the book. Don't look at the tape, look at the book. We're reading page 332 of chapter 8 of Henry David Thoreau. Biography or life, the higher law. The higher law from Chesuncook to Walden. Now we're going to Walden. The question now with Walden underway again. He's underway with writing Walden. He picked up the old manuscript and was how to buy enough time to finish it. How you buy time? Do you need solitude to write? Thoreau wrote Greeley asking for a slot in the popular People's Course lectures in New York, but Greeley doused that idea. Thoreau was neither good enough nor famous enough. He's not good enough or famous enough. He wasn't famous enough or good enough for New York at the time to make a lot of money. For lectures. Perhaps he could swap some of his wood notes wild for dollars. He called it, quote, wood notes wild. They're talking about Walden. Thoreau sent him 2 excerpts from Walden, quote, The Iron Horse and A Poet Buying a Farm, plus the Canada manuscript. While the latter made the rounds, Greeley quickly placed the former with Sartain's Union magazine, where they ran in July and August 1852, but the magazine went bankrupt, and Thoreau went out without pay again. Write something that will sell, begged Greeley. A profile of Emerson, quote, calm, searching, and impartial, unquote, along the lines of that Carlyle essay. For that he'd pay $50 out of the pocket. Wow. For a second time, Thoreau declined to exploit his friendships for money, asking instead if Greeley would loan him $75. A sign of real distress. In March 1853, Putnam's finally paid the $59 for the aborted excursion to Canada, allowing Thoreau to repay Greeley's loan. Fiasco though it was, the Canada essay brought him enough time to complete a fresh draft of Walden. That's the topic in question. Meanwhile, he took Greeley's advice. Greeley's his New York publisher, and concentrated on writing, excusing himself from the Plymouth Circle's December lecture invitation by claiming his current work was too, quote, profane. So you can make excuses saying your work is too profane, and get out of work and work on your book. If not downright unholy. For finding the air of the temple too close, I sat outside. The air of the temple was too close, so he just sat outside. The new Walden was not ready to share. When lecturing and writing both failed, surveying must pay. Lecturing, quote, has not offered to pay for that book which I printed, unquote. He grumbled. But though 100 others could do it just as well, quote, I can get surveying enough. He could survey. The summer of 1853, he landed a big job surveying the new Bedford Road and the adjacent farms where the town was building the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, the innovative and new garden cemetery inspired by Emerson's writings. It was sweaty work. By June, Concord felt like the, quote, the black hole of Calcutta, unquote. And by August it was, quote, sultry, mosquito-y nights with both windows and door open and scarcely a sheet to be endured. You see, mosquitoes come out in August. That's why.
Never complain.
That's why I always recommend hiking in the spring.
I thought you would never complain about
Me complain?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't complain. I just put on bug spray. Well, he complained of mosquitoes. So. Well, the mosquitoes are a problem sometimes. So. Though in the couple centuries from now, they'll realize that mosquitoes were beneficial. In the year 2022, 22, 20, 2020, 2220. The heat was so intense that in New York hundreds died of it. My God. How are they so hot? The summer of 53 was hot. Yeah, I said it was black hole of Calcutta. By February 1854, though, workers were cutting into ground frozen a foot deep and carting off icy lumps, turning Thoreau's abstract lines into reality. It seems now when February comes, it's frozen. By then he was lying out the cemetery grounds. It became cold. It was hot then cold. There was global warming followed by global freezing, which meant cutting down more than 9 acres of woods. Oak and pine worth $767. It's all about the money. He wrote Thatcher, although it was a good time to stay home. He told Blake, let others wheel and deal the whole westward enterprise, quote, towards Oregon, California, Japan, and sea is totally devoid of interest to me. That rhymes. Toward Oregon, Japan, California, Japan, and sea is totally devoid of interest to me. He doesn't care about California. Nothing but a filibustering toward heaven by the great western route. No, they may go their way to their manifest destiny, which I trust is not mine. Thank goodness, he told himself, poverty has nailed me to, quote, this, my native region so long and steadily, and made to study and love the spot of earth more and more. See, he was nailed down by poverty. He could have been rich and just traveled around the world and been distracted. Yet Thoreau also longed, quote, for wildness, a nature which I cannot put my foot through. Drafting a new chapter, quote, higher laws. He may have drafted the new chapter here. Reminded him that even as he asserted that hunting and fishing introduced young men to the wild, he himself had never hunted anything bigger than a woodchuck. That's true of me. I've never hunted anything bigger than a woodchuck. I never did.
What's a woodchuck?
I showed you the picture of a woodchuck. The woodchuck is that critter that eats beans. He's famous in Ohio.
It's big.
He's very famous. What was the thing about the woodchuck? Yeah, he's a big deal, the woodchuck. So when George Thatcher invited him on a late summer hunting trip to the Lake Chesuncook, Chesuncook. Thoreau said yes in a heartbeat. I was thinking this morning, why don't we listen to Homer and Odyssey? Because I'm not erudite in Homer, even I'm completely lacking in knowledge of the classics. Complete ignorance. On Tuesday, September 13, 1853, when the steamer Penobscot left Boston Harbor, bound for Bangor, Thoreau was leaning on the rail in the warm night, watching the lake's smooth seas glide past. By noon the next day, he was walking up to the Dutchers, where he learned that George had gone to Old Town to hire an Indian guide, just what Henry had hoped. For if George's goal was to hunt moose with a gun, horrible. Sometimes, you see, you can go. Ironically, the people who hunt are in nature and exploring nature and can have a beautiful nature walk. Ironically, while they're hunting. That's why I go hunting, but don't pull the trigger. Henry's was to hunt the Indian with a pen. Now he's hunting Indians with his pen. He was not disappointed. George returned, having hired Joe Ation, son of the Penobscot Governor John Ation, who had already planned to go moose hunting at Chesuncook and was happy to adjust his plans for a little extra money. Joe Ation arrived punctually that evening, and the next morning he loaded his birch bark canoe onto the stagecoach to Moosehead Lake, while George and Henry followed behind in a wagon loaded with enough provisions to feed a regiment. Hard bread, pork, smoked beef, tea, and sugar. See, there's that sugar we were talking about. Do you think they had cane sugar? They had bread, pork, and smoked beef, while Henry groused at the $7 fare for Joe and his canoe. Better to have hired a canoe and an Indian up ahead at the lake. See, the $7 is expensive. He could have gone upriver and got a canoe and an Indian. It's expensive. Joe spent the long day riding outside in a driving rain, having given up his inside seat to the ladies. 50 miles up, Thoreau and Thatcher stopped overnight at a tavern in Monson, getting underway before dawn to meet the little steamer Moosehead at the foot of the wild and shaggy Moosehead Lake. There they joined a soaking wet Ation, who had hoped to dry out before setting off. But it would be 4 days before the steamer's next trip, so when the whistle summoned them, they piled aboard, bound for the northeast carry at the head of the lake, 38 miles over rough, stormy waters. Can't believe it. A lake could have rough, stormy waters.
Big lakes, they do.
Rough and stormy.
Finger lakes, maybe six. Got six right there.
And a lake?
The big finger lakes, no big lakes.
The big Finger Lakes. Well, you could have trouble on a small boat on a lake, I guess. I'm no expert, but I have turned over sailboats. Read to 3:35 in Henry David Thoreau, A Life by Laura Dassow Walls.
If you will